Lia Thomas, the first openly trans athlete to win an NCAA Division I championship title, is speaking out about transsexuals competing in women's sports. During a recent interview with Good Morning America, Thomas said she was miserable competing in male sports and said she, quote, doesn't need anyone's permission to be herself and to do the sports she loves.
You can't go halfway and be like, I support trans women and trans people, but only to a certain point, where if you support trans women as women and they've met all the NCAA requirements, then I don't know if you can really say something like that. Trans women are not a threat to women's sports.
Some biological female collegiate athletes disagree, saying despite hormone replacement therapy, biological males have an unfair advantage when they compete in women's sports. Well, here to set us straight is former collegiate swimmer Alexa Schwerha, a reporter for Campus Reform. Hi, Alexa. So you were a member of which college swim team? What was your experience there, and did you compete against any biological men?
So I competed in a Division II collegiate swim team at Notre Dame College my freshman year, and luckily I did not compete against any men. The competition was fair. I was able to compete against women, and that's how it should be.
Well, are there only a few trans athletes competing here and there? Just how widespread is this trend in collegiate sports?
You know, at the moment, it's still pretty low, only a few athletes here and there, but one is still too many, because the bottom line is this: women are getting hurt when men have to compete in women's sports. When men are allowed to compete, women have to make up for some biological advantage that they simply just can't make up. This is coming down to science and fact. So really, this conversation has to be returned to the root of the issue, which is protecting and demanding fairness in women's sports.
Well, I want to get to that again in a moment, but what is the prevailing attitude on America's college campuses? So what are the students that you've talked to saying?
So here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we were able to go down to Georgia Tech the week of the NCAA Women's Swimming Championships, and campus was pretty divided. But the interesting thing to note is that the students that were standing up and saying that this is wrong, men should not be allowed to compete in women's sports, it was the student athletes that were saying that, the students who actually had a stake in the game. And that's because athletes know the hard work and the determination that goes into competing at such a high level. So while it is kind of divided among the student body, more and more students are speaking up and they're demanding action as well. And we're seeing this play out across the country as 18 states have responded to these constituent calls, and they're putting laws on the books that ban men from women's sports.
Alexa, why do you think it's divided on campus? You say there's a different view from the athletes and those who are not athletes, but why do you think it's divided?
Frankly, I think it's a shift in the culture, and I think it's a shift in the general worldview that is being perpetuated to students. And this is something that we see here time and time again at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform. We've been reporting on instances of leftist indoctrination and liberal bias for a decade, and we always say that what happens on a college campus becomes mainstream within society. So when you have these professors that are continuously spouting left-wing ideology in the classroom, these students are taking to that and believing this nonsense, but this has real-time consequences. Now, because this radical gender theory is so pervasive in our culture, we're seeing actual women be hurt and discriminated against. And if more people don't stand up and call this for what it is, which is nonsense, then we're going to witness the death of women's sports and the death of women's opportunities in general.
And as you mentioned earlier, science shows that biological males have a physical advantage over women with strength, endurance, speed, etc. So why aren't more female athletes speaking out against this unfair advantage? We're not hearing as much from them saying that trans men have an advantage in competing against them.
Frankly, women are afraid to speak up. You know, you come out and you say that you're against this, you're labeled as transphobe, you're labeled as all these negative things that, frankly, women don't want to be labeled as. But that's not the root of the issue here. More people need to see this for what it is, which is standing up for fact and truth, because facts can be very, very stubborn things. I realize that, but it can't come second place to reality, because when we ignore the science that tells us that there is a biological advantage between men and women, it's women who are being put on the line and actively discriminated against. This issue goes all the way down to chromosomes. It comes down to DNA. And no amount of hormone replacements or no amount of suppression is going to take away this advantage that makes men have a physical advantage. They're taller than women. They have a larger wingspan, a larger larger lung capacity, greater fast twitch muscles, and this gives them a significant athletic advantage. And in a sport like swimming, a difference between a win and a loss often comes down to a tenth of a second.
And what do those students say to you when you point that out to them, those who support this? What do they say when you point out the science?
Well, a lot of them are enlightened, and that's the most uplifting thing, is that we need to have more of these conversations, pointing out the facts and getting away from such emotional arguments. This conversation has to be rooted in facts. It has to be rooted in science. And when you speak truth, people are willing to listen.
Okay, 18 states have now come out against this, passed legislation opposing trans athletes in women's sports. So we'll see what happens. Campus Reform reporter Alexa Schwerha, thanks for setting us straight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.